you know when you're not following the right path in life, right? It'll hit you at some point. So if you're making decisions out of fear and all those things, it'll hit you at some point. As soon as you face that fear and you actually...
Welcome to the Raw and Real podcast. Are you dreaming of changing your life through opening a business? Or are you curious what obstacles entrepreneurs had to overcome on their journey? Then you're in the right place. My name is Agnes and I'm your host. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Raw and Real. Today's guest is Nick Bradley. He's an entrepreneur, author, speaker, and investor. His background is in growing and scaling VC and private equity-backed businesses. Having successfully built and bought and sold a number of companies and removed himself from day-to-day operations, his focus now is on helping entrepreneurs get to where they want to be in business and in life, as well as in investing in growth businesses and backing turnarounds with the ultimate aim of creating value from significant capital events. Hey, Nick, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, that's great, Agnes. Thank you very much. It's always funny when you hear someone introducing you like that. I'm very humble. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Yeah, I know. It's also fun. I've experienced that myself because everyone has a different perception, right? And you yourself is also like, okay.
And also there's, as we'll get into today, there's always a backstory behind, how that sounds, right? So that sounds all very nicely polished and doesn't sound like it was particularly difficult to do those things. But of course, that's not the truth.
Yeah, of course. So, because you say, hey, there's always a backstory. So I'm very curious before we dive into the topic to get to know about you as a person. Like, how did you grow up and what were your dreams and beliefs during that time?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it quite succinct because there's a number of different parts to that. And the best way to kick that off is probably to talk about it in terms of a roller coaster. So a lot of people talk about entrepreneurship as being a roller coaster, meaning that you have the highs and the lows of that journey, but you also have the excitement that comes with that decision. So in many cases, my life has been like that, in and outside of entrepreneurship. So I grew up in a little place called Adelaide in South Australia. I now live in the UK. And Adelaide is famous for three things: churches, really big great white sharks. In fact, they filmed a lot of the Jaws movies in South Australian waters. And the last one's even the weirdest one, serial killers. There's more serial killers that have come from Adelaide, South Australia per head of population than apparently any other city in the world.
Oh, that's a fun fact.
I have no affiliation with any of those three things. But it's just, well, actually, probably the best thing to say is I had to leave Adelaide when I was in my late teens, and you can probably understand why. But I started my first business when I was 18, and that was a personal training business in Adelaide. And we're talking now back in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And personal training, sort of physical training, is now very commonplace. But back then, no one had ever heard of, paying someone to get screamed at on a treadmill. So it was a bit of a leap of faith, but it was successful. And I ended up selling that business when I was 22 for a little bit of money, not crazy money, but enough for me to then leave Adelaide and move to Sydney. And then I started working for a magazine company, and I was the marketing manager of Men's Health magazine in Australia. And for the next sort of 15 odd years, I effectively worked in the world of corporate. And I rose up the ranks pretty quickly. So I had a very, very illustrious corporate career. I was a board director, a marketing director on a board before I was 30, and I was a CEO of a company before I was 35. And then I started working from that in private equity. And effectively what that meant was I was going into companies that were invested in by very wealthy people, high net worth individuals who were using these private equity firms to then manage those investments. And I was the guy that would go in and do mainly turnarounds, Agnes. So it was where businesses were acquired, but worth significantly less than what they were paid for when I came in. So I had to turn them around and then scale them up. But I'll tell you what happened. So that whole corporate career was a bit of a weird one. And, we were talking sort of offline before recording that you're kind of surrounded by lots of strange dynamics. People are trying to sort of kill each other for the next promotion. There's a lot of fear and uncertainty. People are making decisions around that. And I have to be honest, I was kind of in that in that world myself. So I would have done anything back then to get a promotion, to get a pay rise. And effectively what happened is as I hit my mid 30s, almost probably a decade ago now, I didn't really like the person I was. Had lots of cash, lots of money, lots of status, but I wasn't waking up and being very happy with the person that I'd turned into. And one evening, as we were closing a really big private equity deal, so sort of in the hundreds of millions, so a lot of stress when you're doing that. I wasn't feeling very well anyway. A lot of things had happened. My father had passed away over that sort of previous 6 months. And I was just super stressed. And I went to bed and I literally fell asleep and I cracked all the teeth in this right part of my jaw. And effectively what happened is I was so stressed that I clenched through the night for a number of hours and so much so the pressure broke the teeth. And I remember waking up and going to the bathroom about 4 a.m. and seeing my whole face was just swollen. It like I'd been smashed in the face or punched in the face. And it was extremely so painful, but I didn't know what to do. So I kind of tried to go back to bed. I took some medicine for it, went to the doctor in the morning, and then effectively ended up at the dentist. And they said that, you are not well, basically. You've got so much stress in your body. It wasn't just this. This was the physical manifestation. And I kind of realized at that point in time that I had to stop everything. I had to change everything. So effectively after that, and we can get into it, I went from being a relatively reckless, courageous entrepreneur in my early sort of late teens to then going into this world of corporate where I was a frustrated entrepreneur to then that manifesting physically in this way and a lot of other things that happened. And then I came back into my kind of entrepreneurial spark and journey in my mid 30s. And since then, it's been amazing. But I suppose the lesson, as I'll finish with this for a sec, the lesson is you know when you're not following the right path in life, right? It'll hit you at some point. So if you're making decisions out of fear and all those things, it'll hit you at some point. As soon as you face that fear and you actually fall into the path that you're meant to do, where your values, beliefs, behaviors align, all of a sudden things become effortless and things become a lot more enjoyable. So that's the brief story. There's a lot more to it, but I'll pause there.
I'm curious because you said you would have done everything for a promotion, right, when you were in the corporate world, but at the same time, it wasn't the right path for you and you still had this entrepreneurial desire. So what was the thing that was like driving you every day and still moving you forward to put in all these hours and not be completely fulfilled?
It was money and power. It was money and power. So it came back to, I was effectively trying to prove to myself that I could, thrive and to some extent survive in what was a very cutthroat world. Very, it's like in corporate, we was talking about, it can get really political. And so the pattern I had then, or the programming I had then was one of being combative, or combative. I was there to beat other people. So if I can be frank on the show, I was an ass. I wasn't a very nice person back then. And effectively, if you keep doing that, if that becomes a habit, you show up to work every day and that's how you're thinking, it's not great for your psychology.
When you really started to dive into the entrepreneurial world again, what were some of the mental patterns that you experienced that were really holding you back and really that you had to change?
Well, the first thing was, if we go back to why did I go into corporate from having a small but successful entrepreneurial start, back then I didn't know any better. So I was more intuitive and, the opportunities presented themselves. And when you're young, you think you're unstoppable. Things change potentially as you get older. They don't have to, but when you're young, you don't have the awareness of other things. So therefore the fear that can come later in life doesn't seem to be there as much. So back then I was, as I said, I was relatively rebellious and I kind of just jumped into it. I think I went into the pathway of a safe, inverted commas, corporate career because that's what my family told me to do all the way through growing up. So even when I started my fitness business, they were like, are you sure that you should be doing this? Because, that's risky and safety means having a job. Yeah. So of course I listened to that and I had in the back of my mind, it was programmed since I was a young kid that, what I was doing was wrong and therefore I should do the thing that my parents and everyone else was telling me to do. But the reality of that is that was the wrong message. I was different to them. And where it really came together. So as I said, I did 15 years or even a bit more in corporate. I met my father. I re-met my father when I was in my early 30s. So the backstory there is that he left our family when I was 2, 3 years old, and divorce and all those things. And I never had any contact with him until I was about 32, 33. Now here's the interesting pivot to the story is he was a very, very successful entrepreneur.
Wow.
But I was never told that. And I don't think anyone knew that, but he started a business. We had lots of different businesses, but he had a very, very successful business in his 30s, where he had a number of jewelry shops, really high-end jewelry. And he lost the whole lot in his mid-40s because there was a bombing in Melbourne of the Turkish consulate. It was actually considered a terrorist attack, and therefore he got no insurance money. So he lost everything. He effectively went bankrupt from being a millionaire in his mid-40s. And then he had to go and take a job, and he ended up starting another business in his early 50s and then became a millionaire again towards his late 50s. And I met him in his 60s again.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Well, it is, because, back to, patterns and behaviors versus innate stuff. So I had a lot of traits of him in me as a young guy, certainly when I started that business. Then I fell into programming. And then I met him and I realized a few things. And that was the time that he then died very quickly of cancer. And I had that sort of physical breakdown. So you can imagine what that's like, right? So all of a sudden, I'm now realizing that perhaps I should have done what I was always doing. He comes into my life. He's a very different person than what I expected. He then dies. I'm stuck doing all this stuff that I'm not particularly fulfilled about. And then it shows up in the way that I describe.
Did that strengthen you in your belief to start something on your own?
It gave me a wake up, right? So when I had that, the teeth incident, as I call it, I did two things. I kind of thought, well, first and foremost, I knew that I had to change something anyway. That was a pretty obvious piece. And I spoke to my wife and she was very supportive and she knew this was coming. And I called up a mate of mine who I knew from university in Australia, who was a very successful entrepreneur. In fact, he retired at around 28 years of age when he sold a very, very big company to a US company for about 65 million Australian dollars. And back at university, he was always a bit mad. We were out drinking and playing pool and, doing stuff like that, not studying. And he wasn't effectively studying the syllabus at university, but he was going to all these different events and he was doing a lot of personal development. And we all thought he was mental, right? But he was always a nice guy, but he was never kind of really, like we were. Anyway, I called him up after the teeth thing and had a chat. And he said, I explained everything to him. And he said, you need to get yourself into a different room. And he suggested going to one of the Tony Robbins events. So I looked online. I'd read a couple of Tony's books beforehand, but never done anything about them. I always found them fascinating, but, couldn't be bothered really. And then I thought, well, stuff it, I'm going to actually go and to one of these events. So about 3 weeks after I'd had my incident, there was an event running in Chicago. And I said to my wife, I'm just going to go. And she was like, yep, do it. So I literally bought the ticket, flew to Chicago, went to an event called Unleash the Power Within, 4 days. And that just changed everything. It didn't present necessarily anything groundbreaking, but it consolidated a lot of the thoughts that I was having. And then effectively what I did is I had a very high 6-figure private equity job. I made the decision on the Sunday in Chicago to quit that job with nothing to go to. But instead of being romantic about it, which is like, I'm going to go and walk in and hand my notice in and, blah, I didn't effectively quit. I made the decision to quit on that Sunday, but I didn't quit for about 9 months.
Wow.
But because what I did is I went and created a whole new set of businesses. And one of those businesses, I call it a business now because it is a business, was the podcast that I've got.
So I'm curious, why do you call your podcast a business now? Is it because you get a lot of leads from it for your other programs, or?
It has generated over 7 figures worth of revenue in less than 18 months. I can explain how that works, but what I did is I realized there's two things I realized. First and foremost was I'm an entrepreneur and I've repressed it. Okay, so I'm much more creative than I gave myself credit for. Fear was holding me back in programming. I realized that I needed to balance both achievement and fulfillment. So, everything was about achievement measured by money. How can I help more people get what they want? And actually, if I can bring those two things together, I'll still have financial ambition, but I can do both together. Okay. And then the third part was, what do I really enjoy, right? And I'm not a great reader, but I've always been a really good audiobook person. If you kind of get the difference, still reading, but it's just different.
Yeah.
And I listen to lots of podcasts, and I thought for a second, well, hold on. If I want to help more people and I want to turn that into a range of different businesses, whatever that is at that point, I said, I need to go out there and have something out there, whether that's a YouTube channel or a podcast. And I went and got a mentor, a guy who runs the biggest business podcast in the UK, a guy called Rob Moore. And I paid for him to mentor me to create Scale Up Your Business. And then off the back of that mentoring, I created 7 separate companies.
Wow. Seems like a good mentor to me.
Well, he just opened my eyes to this world. No, I didn't start. I want to be honest with everyone. I didn't start the podcast effectively to make it a 7-figure business. I started the podcast to balance two things. But in the back of my mind, I thought, well, if I can really help people in the way that I have been, then of course that's going to have commercial opportunity around it as well in different ways, particularly back to my whole investment strategy in my private equity world. So what I did in that 9 months, and this is the funny bit, right? And my advice to any entrepreneur listening to this is, don't always think the romantic ideal of, it's called burning the boats. Don't go in there and just quit your job and think that, that's the best way. For some people, that is the best way, but it can also create a lot of stress. Now, I was a sort of 40-year-old guy and had kids in private school and $1 million house and mortgages and stuff. So, woe is me. But the point is, giving up a 6-figure salary was not going to happen. Yeah. So I needed to do that. And so just to finish the story, Agnes, I launched the podcast and I did a few things. We can get into that. But I knew there was going to be a point in time where my current employer was going to start to notice that I was doing these things.
Of course.
And I wasn't making...
Yeah, because you're doing it publicly, right? It's not like...
Oh, yeah, I didn't make any money in that 9 months. I deliberately didn't set the podcast up to make money in that first 9 months. But what I did is I scaled the podcast crazily. So I went to number 1 in the UK and number 17 in the US business charts. And then the person who was the chairman of the company I was running for the private equity firm called me in one day. Actually called me in 3 times, but the last day, that was it. And he kept sort of saying, we don't like you doing this podcast. And
what?
I was like, oh, it's a hobby. All right. In the back of my mind, I knew that it was the pathway to do something else, but I wasn't breaking any rules, but they just didn't like the idea. They didn't like the idea that I was starting to get a reputation, get a brand myself.
Yeah.
And eventually when they told me to stop, which they did, on that day, I knew it was coming. I just quit that day. And it took 9 months from the Chicago UPW for that to happen.
So I want to dive a little bit into the podcast for you, right? Because that's really how it all started for you. And then the first months you didn't monetize it at all. I don't remember if you have sponsors on it, but I'm very curious how it all led for you to monetization.
Yeah, sure. I made a decision early on. So this was partly through the mentorship. So one of the things, if you've ever read Think and Grow Rich, which is an amazing book, Napoleon Hill, it's a bit of a weird book because it's written in the 1930s, but it has a very clear set of principles in it. And one of those principles is specialized knowledge. So one of the decisions I made coming out of Chicago was I'm going to get close to people from both a professional and personal development standpoint. So get to the best people I can get to, invest money. So I had to put some cash in, but learn the quickest way to do what I needed to do. So on the podcast, I had 2 choices. I could have gone down the advertising route, or I could have gone down what we call trickle-down revenue. And I'll explain what that is. I chose not to go down the advertising sponsorship route. And I get asked quite a bit now to take advertising, and I might do it one day. I haven't said I'm never going to do it, but I thought it would dilute the message too much for me. And I realized that I'd have to get a lot of reach to make really good money from that. And I didn't want to have to be focused on always trying to drive reach. I wanted to be focused on creating great content and then growing more organically. And so this was the bet. The bet was that if I could go out there and effectively own the niche of scale up, so no one really talks about scale up in the way I do. There's a few authors that do, but not certainly on the podcast space. Then I will have a number of services that I don't necessarily do myself, but I'll have businesses that come underneath that, and I'll monetize my personal brand and my reach through those businesses.
So as an affiliate?
No. I own the businesses. So I'll explain what the ecosystem looks like. And it kind of works for what I've done. It won't work for every podcast. But I have got an investment company where we buy and sell businesses. And we do it in a very, very interesting way. I have an advisory business where I sit as a non-exec, advising boards and founders, CEOs of companies. But that's effectively, sitting on the board and being that strategic sounding board. I have a consultancy business, which is where we actually go and do assessments and diagnostics around all things growth and scale up. I have a marketing agency, which actually focuses on both growth marketing and sales conversion. I've actually got a couple of online retail businesses that I've launched as well off the back of that through collaborations and partnerships through people who've come on the podcast. So they're not all direct lines, but everything, if you think of it like a triangle, everything started with the podcast and then opportunities came from them. And as people became attracted to my message, effectively asking for help, I created businesses off the back of the various things that they were asking for.
Yeah, that's a really cool strategy.
And coaching mentoring is probably the other one. I do a little bit of, I call it more mentoring than coaching. But I work with quite big businesses. So they have to be at least 7 figures wanting to exit for 8 to 9 figures. So of course, the fees that I charge for mentoring are proportionate to the value that I'm doing. So it's a different type of coaching than maybe some of the other coaches you see out there.
That sounds really cool. So, when we also dive into the topic of scaling, right? So what do you see are the most common problems that people have when it comes to scaling?
I love the topic of scale up to create significance. It's a significant impact. And for me, that's about creating business empires, right? Ultimately. And I'll explain what I mean by that as well. But the first thing to start off with is startup is a lot of fun. And it's quite chaotic and there's a lot of energy, but there's no structure. And to some extent, that's part of the beauty of startup is that you can come up with an idea. You don't have a whole heap of resource constraints. And a lot of people who can do that well, it's a very, very certain type of both mindset and skill set. However, there's a point where you literally hit a wall where you're only going to go so far with that type of thinking methodology experience. And I often say this is people who are great at startup are usually not good at scale up. It takes a very, very different identity. Doesn't mean that you can't doesn't mean you can't become that person. But if you look into history, some of the more kind of obvious businesses, I mean, take Google, Larry and Sergey could not scale their business. They had to bring in, what's his name? Eric Schmidt, I think it was. Anyway, the CEO who's there now, Mark Zuckerberg, couldn't scale Facebook, right? So he's still around the place, but he doesn't run the business, not really. So the difference between those two things, right? The difference between startup to scale up is first and foremost, scale up is defined in my world as the ability to build teams. So you've got to be able to manage people and build teams. You've got to be a better leader of people, first and foremost. You've got to have a real appreciation for structure and process. Okay, scale up is really about turning something into a well-oiled machine. And you can see now the creative entrepreneur who's really good at, having a vision and having a product, as soon as they have to do process mapping and automation and bring systems in, half the time their eyes glaze over. You see what I mean? But to get to something which is worth 8, 9 figures or more, to create $1 billion company, a unicorn, it's all about creating process structure, building teams, leadership, capability. And so that's the difference. And that's where I come in. I come in at that point because I have a very clear set of principles. There's 6, I call them 6 peaks of value creation. Value creation is a bit of a grandiose term, but what it is when someone wants to buy your business, and a lot of people start businesses because they want to sell them, and then they want to live on an island and have freedom and wealth, and and obviously they want to make an impact too. But to be frank, there's a financial thread that goes through entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
They want to sell their business one day. And so I created this thing called the 6 peaks, which is the 6 areas that I saw in my private equity days, which if you have those 6 things working, characteristics working in a business, you're going to maximize the value and the chances actually of being able to sell that business one day.
Can you walk us through them?
Yeah, happy to. So some of them, none of this is rocket science, but when I say them to you, you'll kind of go, yeah. But it's the clever part, I think, for businesses that are really successful is that they weave these things together. So they're not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 independent things. And I have an assessment actually, which I get people to do, which gives a score around this. And what usually happens is out of the 6, 4 might be working really well, and therefore the entrepreneur doesn't think he's got a problem or she's got a problem. But actually there's 2 that aren't firing. And that means, when I come in to work on a business, I focus on those 2, right? And then the whole thing starts to lift. So the first one is purpose. And that's defined by two things, actually. It's the vision you have for the business, which sounds obvious, but a lot of people, when they start a business, they have vision, but they lose that vision when it hits scale up. So they forget the reason why, because they now have too much complexity. So it's about having a really crystal clear vision. I often say clarity is a superpower. You've got to know the direction you're going. If that is to sell the business, if the vision is to sell the business for $1 billion in 5 years' time, nothing wrong with that as a vision, because at least you have a point you're going to. And then the thing you need to have which supports that is a very, very clear strategic map. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be this perfectly formed blueprint that's not going to change, but it's milestones. And what I often do with people is I say, let's work out a 3-year vision for the business. Now let's break it down to 12-month goals. And now we're going to forget about your 12-month goals, right? And we are only going to work to a 90-day cadence. A 90-day cadence means that every day and every week you haven't got an out to be able to let something slip. And then we get focused on routines, habits, and daily actions. So you see the difference there. So you're focused on work that you do daily or weekly to drive the 90-day cadence, which then makes the 12-month ambition certain. And therefore the 3-year vision becomes much more realistic. Okay. So that's purpose. The second one is profit. And that's 2 things. Again, it's making sure that you have a cash runway in your business. I've been focusing a lot more on that now with the whole COVID thing, because if you haven't got at least 6 months of cash reserves, then your psychology changes and then you start to panic. You can't help it. It's just the fear thing, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have that. And I say minimum 3 months, ideally 6 months of cash. 2 things happen then. You have resources to deploy. You can make some better strategic decisions. But the second thing is, and some people disagree with me on this, but I feel you have to have, as a business owner, you've got to have a relentless focus on profitability anyway. And lots of businesses, particularly technology businesses, think about revenue and recurring revenue, and they're not sustainable. They always have to go after more funding because they're always propping up this thing that's going to create value properly at some point.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're smiling away there, Agnes. You've probably seen this before.
Yeah. Next funding round. Yeah.
Yeah, and I laugh at that. I don't invest in those businesses. I mean, people laugh sometimes. They go, "Oh yeah, but it's going to be this, it's going to be that." And I say, "No, I buy profitable businesses. I buy boring, profitable businesses that I know that I can scale up and make millions from." And I don't mind tech businesses that have a pathway to profit and they know the journey. But what I don't like is when they keep kicking the can down the road, if you know that expression. So that's profit. The third one is proposition. And there's 2 parts to this. It's effectively not just the product or service that you have, which is where a lot of entrepreneurs fall down. It's the whole experience that gets wrapped around that product or service. Because if you want to create something remarkable and sustainable, it's not just the product. It's the whole end-to-end experience that the person, or the customer or the client gets. And the way to do that is to focus on product ecosystems, not just products. And there's a whole piece around what that means, but it's effectively the whole journey. So I often start with, I mean, if you look at what I explained to you, I've got a piece at the front end of my proposition, which is free.
Yeah.
My free is the podcast, right? Then I have a number of things that happen after the podcast. And then I have a number of core services that I want to sell. And then I have a number of other products that are for clients who have worked with me in the past. So I have a 4-step product ecosystem that's built underneath Scale Up Your Business.
I'm curious there also for a moment. Let's say you record a podcast episode, a new listener comes in, right? Do you advertise your services on your podcast, or do you get them in an email sequence? Or...
I do a bit. Yeah, no, I do a bit of both. I invite, my whole philosophy is what I call customer creation. So it's about adding value first and inviting people to participate where they see fit. So to give you a very kind of simplified version of what I do. So I'll do the podcast. I'll promote on the podcast our Scale Up Your Business community on Facebook, where we've got a few thousand entrepreneurs and business leaders in that. I've got a whole team now that runs that community, offering, basically we go around the world finding the best resources we can, and we share those resources in the community. So it's almost like a curated resource. And then from that, obviously, to join the community, we do collect data, and then we have different nurturing that happens through that process. And then we launch products, as I would call it, into the community first. So any mastermind programs I've got a consulting product, things like that. We launch through that process. But at that point in time, people have spent hours with me.
Yeah.
Sometimes people have spent, I mean, I know people who've actually binged all 120 episodes of Scale Up Your Business.
Yeah.
So by the time they ever get to meet me or speak to me, they know
They're already
everything.
sold.
Well, they know because they've spent, they say there's a thing called the 7-hour rule, which basically means spend 7 hours with someone, and then there's enough trust that's been developed or hasn't been developed, depending on what you look at, for them to make a decision whether they could work with you in a commercial way. I've got people spending 50 to 100 hours. So you can see how that, I don't have to sell anything. I invite. If they don't want to do it, it doesn't bother me. I'm like, well, it's either right for you or it's not.
Yeah.
But that's the way we do it.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that's sort of proposition. And then the last 3. So the fourth one is what we call predictability. And that's predictability defined as a predictable flow of the right clients, customers coming into the business, driving recurring revenue. So we always look for businesses that have some form of either longer term contracts or subscription. And a lot of people fall down by the idea of predictable flow. And that's all about the whole join up between marketing and sales process. And it's actually, if you get super clear on who your target audience is, like crystal clear, like really niched, and then you understand them intimately, it's actually quite easy to be able to work out how you solve their problem and to be able to communicate with them in a way which is very intentional. And we have metrics and data, or we recommend that runs all the way through predictability. Everything is about numbers. Nothing is random. And then fifth one is process. It's basically, this is one of the kind of links with 2 with profit. How do you bring process to make your business less chaotic and more predictable again? And how do you automate where you can so that you're focusing people interventions on high value activities, and anything else is much more efficient. And then the last one is people. And it's the last one for the reason it's up there with purpose being the first one. You've got to have amazing people. And amazing people doesn't mean that they're the best skilled all the time, but it means they believe in the vision, and they are working with a very defined set of values, behaviors from the culture that's been created. So just to quickly summarize those 6, if all of those 6 are working together and all of them have very clear plans around them, so firstly where you are today and you know what you're trying to get to, you can see how powerful that is in terms of scale up. As I said before, it's about structure. It's about having those things in place.
Yeah, thanks so much for walking us through that. So I heard also that you have 4 pillars of success. To be grateful, be brave, have faith, and show up. Can you explain that also a little bit
Yeah,
more
I can talk
detail?
about that. Yeah. So, somewhat embarrassingly, that saying, which is, as you said, be grateful, be brave, have faith, show up, came to me in the shower. And I'll tell you how it happened. So I went, after I did UPW with Tony Robbins, I went to another one of his events, same year actually, Date with Destiny. And UPW was great, but Date with Destiny is like another level. Have you ever done any of that stuff?
Well, I haven't been there physically, but I watched I'm Not Your Guru, and I know quite some people that were there as well.
Okay, so I Am Not Your Guru is Date with Destiny. So I went to Palm Beach in Florida, and it's like 6 days, right? And it's long days. I mean, some of the night sessions finish at 2, 3 in the morning, right? And on the last day, you have to draw this poster. In fact, that's it. There it is.
Oh, wow.
The photo, you can't really see it, but it sits behind my desk. And effectively, that poster is a summation of your 6 days of what you work on. And he does this thing where he effectively tries to ingrain the summary. And he says, listen, you don't want to make it too long because it's going to be a very painful exercise in terms of you say it like a mantra, like an incantation. Mm-hmm. So I was struggling. I wrote down this big statement and I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Right. And then all of a sudden in the shower, it came to me, what really am I trying to create, in my life? And what are the things that are going to underpin that creation? It's like an epiphany. And so to break it down very quickly, gratitude is the antidote to fear. So psychologically, I've studied psychology at university, you can't have those two dimensions existing at the same time. So if you're ever feeling really scared about anything, just focus on what you've got in your life today, which is fantastic. So for me, be grateful for me is the kickoff because, everyone feels fear. And it's not to say, I still have fear when I'm doing big things. You've got to push yourself. But I know that if I'm grateful for what I have right now, I have the power to be able to jump into that fear. Then obviously it leads into be brave, all right? So first be grateful, understand the context, be brave to take the action that's required. Have faith that it's going to work out. So that's trust yourself, again, trust that there's something pulling you towards where you're supposed to be. And show up for me is similar to what I said a minute ago. It's about taking action. I often say you can't meditate yourself to success, right? And I meditate every day. So I'm not saying meditation is bad, but you can't just meditate and expect everything's going to happen. You've got to do the work. And showing up to me is now I'm clear. I've got the intention. I know what I'm doing. I'm now going to do the work. And that's what show up means.
That sounds awesome. Do you still have a last key takeaway, personal insight that you would like to share that helped you grow?
I'm going to circle back to what I said at the beginning of this, if that's all right, is everyone has a kind of, I think, a mission and a purpose. And I think intuitively, you can find that. I mean, a lot of people, they're not clear on it. And they're not clear on it because they're either living someone else's life or they're living what other people have told them they should do, not really what they want to do. So my challenge to people, I suppose my insight is this is, it's worth spending some time finding out what that mission, that purpose is for you, and then doing whatever you can to live that. And because if you don't do it, I believe it hits you later, it hits you in life. I got it lucky. I got teeth when I was in my 30s. Other people get it at, cancer in their 70s. But I think you've really got to, live to who you are. Otherwise you are going to have, regrets and things like that later.
So you think on a deeper level, you always knew when you were working in corporate that you should do something on your own?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Subconsciously, yes. But I didn't realize that until a few things came together. So I think if anyone's listening to this and they hate what they're doing, they hate it, you've got to ask yourself the question, why are you doing it? Now, that doesn't mean, as I said, you have to stop it straight away, but you first need to stop in your tracks and work out, well, something's not right here. And you need to answer that question. It may mean that you have to change everything like I did, or it may mean that you have to change a few smaller things. But what you can't do is just allow it to continue.
And where can people find you online?
Well, listen, if you've got a business, even if it is just in startup, listen to the podcast, listen to Scale Up Your Business. That's always fun. Join the community if you want to. But yeah, I tend to hang out mainly on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn's my main thing. You can find me, Nick Bradley, there. I tend to get back to everyone as best I possibly can these days. But yeah, I love to help people. That's definitely something that's been a big part of who I am, certainly since I've moved into this world.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that great knowledge and for your personal story. So for everyone who's watching or listening, we would love to hear from you. So what was your favorite takeaway from the conversation today? Make sure to let us know in the comments below the video.